I would encourage everyone to make sure that the band, both with instruments and without instruments, is able to understand their posture responsibilities, because obviously as we do a build-up approach to marching band, standing still, standing up, with instrument, without instrument, then we start to move all those things forward, then we start to do slides, and then we're just going to keep building. And if that foundational aspect of posture and understanding of those elements is not there, then all of that's going to continue to struggle. And so I really encourage everyone to spend some time, talk about posture, talk about the instrument, talk about where your arms and your shoulders are, and really make sure that the students have that understanding and have a good understanding in terms of actual application, so that as we start to move across the field, then we start to move and play across the field, that those sorts of things continue to be a stable foundation. So I really encourage you to look at that. Obviously, the first step, again, you can spend hours on the first step. There's a lot of first steps in the show. Every halt, everything that you think about in terms of that first initial movement. So that's something that you definitely want to spend time on. But also, I don't want to, I've seen bands get bogged down and really not be able to do anything other than that first step. So there's a real balance there in terms of choice. But the first step, whatever, again, the technique is irrelevant. It's the first step, it's the pulse. And that's my second topic, is pulse. So how do we look at pulse? How do you talk about pulse? And again, I'm really talking and looking for you to kind of key in on a few of these key fundamental foundational type things. And depending on your band's development, you may be further along in the process, and that's perfectly fine. I still think these are important topics and things that shouldn't be overlooked. But pulse is just the key, right? Visually, it's the key. It's going to make the band look unified. It's going to make them look uniform. It's going to make them have control. It's going to allow the drill to do what it's supposed to do based on the pulse. Now, you can then marry that into musical skills and musical impacts and musical accuracy, because if we have that foundation, that key foundation of pulse in our feet, we're going to be able to build off of that musically, and I think that that's something that's really important. So pulse is something I talk about to our band every single day. I refuse to kind of give any ground on that. If they're horn up, if the subdivision, if that first step is not in time, we stop and we start, because a lot of times pulse is really related to mental acuity. It's their mental focus. Are they ready to go? And typically that horn is late coming up, or that first step is delayed because they're just not ready to go. And so by stopping them and not allowing that habit to be developed, even though it's frustrating, certainly on my side, certainly on your side, it kind of shows the kids, the students in the band, that, hey, this is serious, this is something important. And I make sure that everybody on staff, whether you're on music staff, or you're on visual staff, color guard staff, percussion staff, everybody is consistent, and we talk about pulse on a daily basis. So that's really, to me, an unbelievably critical thing, and something that shouldn't be taken for granted in terms of how we approach our daily routines of fundamentals. So within those two things, posture and pulse, you can test those things through a variety of techniques, 8s and 8s, across the floors, across the fields, whatever you want to call them, straight down the fields. And as you evolve and as the program gets stronger, you can build those fundamentals and those foundational aspects into slide exercises and change of directions, touch and goes, box drills, anything that you're having. But no matter what, that pulse and that posture is going to be critically important to the band and their fundamental exercise. Again, I call it kind of foundational elements. The next thing that I want to talk about is step size. So through a couple of years of getting to go around to different bands and talk to different people and observe, I really realized that step size was incredibly important to the success of the band from every aspect, from fundamentals all the way up through cleaning of the drill. If you think about today's drills, whether you're, again, stylistically, whether you're HBCU, whether you're Big Ten, it doesn't matter if you're doing the Michael Jackson, Ohio State coming across, but the step sizes are for all those drills and all those forms and all those sets to be clear and communicated all the way up here to the press box is step size. That's one key aspect to it. Think about the drill animations that we use today, so writing in Pieware or the other drill animations that are available today. When you show the students those animations, they're perfect. And they're perfect for a couple of reasons, right? One is every student or every performer in that computer is in time, it's taking the right path, and it's taking the correct step size. So if you think about that, step size, something as simple as 8s and 8s, if they don't hit that yard line, or those 7 first steps aren't the same as that last 8th step, step size is critically important. It's not just when you arrive at the dot, but it's how you get to that dot, or how you get to that next yard line. So step size is something, again, that I emphasize on a daily basis in the fundamental programs at Lassiter, as well as other groups that I've worked with over the years. And I think it's just really critically important that you don't let that slip aside. Make sure that you're really focused on keeping that as part of the primary focus.
You know, if I want to jump back in on this, what are 2 or 3 different things that you would do in your warm-up fundamental to address those different step sizes? We do 8s and 8s, we do a variety of things, but how do you accommodate that need from a fundamental standpoint?
Sure, so a lot of things, thanks David. One of the things that I talk about a lot in my band, they probably hate it, but it's the midpoint of a phrase. So where is the midpoint? Whether it's 8 and 8, which is count 4, we all know what that is, splitting the yard line. Are we checking our progress through those counts to make sure that count 4 is correct? Therefore, we have a better chance of meeting or hitting our goal on count 8. Now, if we add some change of step size exercises, some adjusted step size exercises in where we might go 10 steps for every yard line, or 12 steps, or 6 steps, or even 4 steps if we get to an advanced level where we can really increase the size, we can then talk about how that step size changes from beat 10, or count 10 to count 1, or count 8 to count 1, or count 6 to count 1. And if you think about that from a drill applications perspective, that's what happens in the drill.
So I'm envisioning that process may look like through the first 5 minutes of fundamental, not first 5, but 5 minutes of the fundamental block, you might do the traditional 8.5,
right.
The 22.5 inch step,
correct,
and 8 and 8s, but then maybe you might do a rep down the field where they're doing 10 steps per yard line, or 12 steps.
Yes.
And then you might vary it, so you might do 1 rep of 8 to 8, mark time for 8, and the next is 16.
Yeah.
To kind of mimic that.
Absolutely.
That step size change from one page to the next?
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll also put them together in terms of taking the holds out. So what we'll do is 2 sets of 8 to 5, 2 sets of 10 to 5, 2 sets of 12 to 5, back to 2 sets of 8 to 5. I like to end with 8 to 5 and begin with 8 to 5 because that's kind of our check.
Right.
You know, that's our check
that's home
pattern.
base. That's our F concert.
We know what that is. And we want to always start now with that. But then we will add variety in there. You know, and again, depending on where you are, both from a style choice perspective, but also a skill set in your band, you could add 6 to 5. That's a little bit larger step size.
Right.
And then obviously getting into a really advanced step of 4 to 5 or 5 to 5, where you're changing the technique, but still the process is they're going from a traditional marching technique to a jazz run technique or whatever you might be doing. So you can use that type of exercise to really address specific skills that they're going to use that day in the drill.
And I suppose it would be advantageous to take that same process to other drill maneuvers that we do, whether it's a diamond drill or where we're doing a box or any other thing. You just vary up those step sizes for that focal point of the day.
Absolutely. And like one of the things that we've done for the last several years is really focused on pulse and control and technique control. And going forward is something everybody does every day. Right? We all walk around in our normal lives walking in the forward direction.
Not many teenagers going down the hallway backwards.
Right. If they are, they're in band. And
usually a couple, but not very many.
You should reward them.
Right.
So that shift when you introduce that backup technique is sometimes a little bit shocking, even to the older kids. It's because it's just not something they do every day comfortably.
Maintaining that core and the separation of the upper body. So
one of the things we do is we change the step size when we introduce the backup technique. We do a 12 to 5.
Cool.
because that allows us to really focus on the technique. They're at a much more comfortable stride.
And that smaller step size.
Smaller step size. And it allows them, again, the checkpoint is 6. So we know where the midpoint of that phrase is. So we're always validating our step size on count 6. But it seems to really kind of, it's almost a little bit of relief on the students, especially at band
That's a
camp.
great idea, because one of my mantras is always making sure that we bring things down to the most common denominator. And so many times it's very easy, I find, to jump from one thing to the next thinking we're doing the right thing, but not realizing for the newest marchers, we want to make sure we minimize that demand gap so they can control what they're learning on the onset. So that's
Right.
so I'm thinking here too, maybe for young teachers or all of us, I'm such an obsessive compulsive rehearsal monster about time. Maybe we need to focus on assessing what demands are in our drill, what step sizes are
Absolutely.
the most common,
Absolutely.
and narrow it down to those 3 or 4. And if we have more than that, maybe talk to our drill writer differently next year, right?
Absolutely, yeah. A couple things. So there's someone that's going to speak to you a little bit later this afternoon, Alfred Watkins, who's one of my mentors and dear friends. And he once told me, he said, Dave, you can't go from A to D. You have to go A, B, C.
Yeah.
And if you leave out B or C on your way to D, you're going to be in real trouble. And that's exactly to your point. You know, backing it down and making sure, you know, for instance, one of the things I do all the time is we use in our fundamental exercise program every day show tempos. Now, we do, I will say this, we do start with 120. We start with 120 because Mr. Souza, he kind of knew what he was doing.
He kind of got that right, yeah.
He figured that tempo out. So we start with 120. It's a comfortable tempo. It seems that it doesn't create that physical and mental challenge on the students that they're freaking out about what's going on. Now, once we start that, as soon as we know what the show is, ballad tempo is our slow tempo, opener tempo is our fast tempo, and if we're closing the show with even faster tempo, we'll do that. As I get later into the season, I will actually do fundamentals in show tempo order.
Well, and it makes so much sense, because how can we expect them to move and play with mastery if we haven't given them a chance to learn
Right.
how to move and isolate and do all those
Right.
things relaxed
Yes.
in isolation before we do all the other stuff?
Yeah,
So
and
that makes
think
total
about that.
sense.
If your show tempo is 160, though, you have to be able to get to 168, 172 in order for your students to feel comfortable at 160.
While adding more demand on
Right.
top of it. Yeah.
So you go beyond your tempo, and then when you all of a sudden that 160 is going to feel real comfortable.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, I derailed you a little bit on your
That's okay.
mission. We have maybe a couple of minutes left, Dave, on that. So what might be your synopses, encouragement for folks out there that are listening as far as we move from the learning phase into
Yeah,
competition?
perfect.
What would be your great advice in the next
This
3 or
time
4
of
weeks?
year is that shift, right? We've now got maybe the whole show on, and now we're starting that process of fine-tuning and filling it in. And I would say that, you know, making sure that you don't, and it sounds a little bit naive maybe, but don't give up on those foundational aspects, right? The first thing to go when we get behind schedule-wise isn't musical warm-up, it's visual warm-up.
Yeah, I'm so
and-
glad you said that,
yeah,
because
and
so
it's
many
like-
times they say, well, when was the last time you did your 8 and 8s?
Right.
Well, in band camp.
Yeah, and even if it's 15 minutes, and I know it's hard to give up that time, but I would say make sure that the students, just like you would in terms, I always talk about it in musical terms. If you would do it musically, how do you teach the music? You teach the music from first note to second note to third note. You don't teach the music backwards. So those same skills and those same philosophies and theories all apply.
Absolutely.
And so if you've got to warm up to play your show, you should warm up visually to march your show.
Every rehearsal.
Every rehearsal.
Yeah, that's great.
And the more time you can spend on it, the better. But obviously, you know, we're in a crunch now ourselves. But you know, production schedules and working with the band director, and the band director working with your staff to understand the wants and needs of your staffs, percussion, visual, and guard, to make sure that we're addressing those things on a cohesive basis as we go forward at this time of year. Because everybody has different priorities right now, and it's a matter of you guiding the process by understanding what everybody needs and making that plan.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dave McCarthy.
All right, thank
Appreciate
you.
your great insights. We'll be back in just a few minutes here with our next guest, Colby Kazankowski.
Good luck, everybody. Thank you.